Greetings, folks, and welcome back to the Hokey Pokey World Tournament. It's been quite a few hot minutes since I last posted a serious video on this channel. The mod really had me bogged down. You know, like the Chinese against Japan. Too soon? Yeah, anyways, it's time for another Hearts of Iron 4 DLC review. And today, we have one of the more famous expansions, the first, actually, for this game, released in 2018, Waking the Tiger. Because timing has never been on my side and never will be, I'm making this video just as Paradox comes out with a possible DLC for Japan and China, which, hey, if they're looking for names, I like to suggest Waking the Tiger again. But I've fluffed up these script paragraphs for long enough. Let's get into this third installment. Waking the Tiger is the third major DLC for HOI4, considered the first fully fledged expansion as opposed to its country pack predecessors. This is because it adds a plethora of new features and mechanics alongside its country content, whereas Death of Dishonor almost exclusively added focus trees. Never mind how Together for Victory unlocked a major feature as well, and therefore shouldn't be considered a country pack, but whatever. The DLC was released on March 8th, 2018, alongside the 1.5 patch, nicknamed Cornflakes. For what it's worth, Operation Cornflakes was an attempt by the American Office of Strategic Services to deliver anti-Nazi propaganda to German citizens through the Postal Service. This DLC is the last one of the three integrated into the base game on April 4th, 2024, alongside the aforementioned Death of Dishonor and Together for Victory. The DLC's pricing, meant to reflect its more expansive status, was set higher than its predecessors, at $20 and €20 respectively. The free update added a plethora of features, from a complete rework of the German and Japanese focus trees to the mechanics of war support and stability as we know them, army groups led by field marshals, commander skill levels, the decisions tab, and new interfaces for armament production and warfare. The DLC expanded upon many of these new features, such as adding traits for military commanders and the ability for them to acquire new ones. Also exclusive to the DLC were the original formidable nations, thanks to those new decision things, the ability to send an attaché to a nation's in a war, the Japan-themed autonomy states of the Imperial Satellites, Imperial Associates, and Imperial Protectorates, and 3 new songs, War of Resistance, Battle of Wuhan, and Empire of the Sun. Did I forget anything? Oh, I forgot to mention, also added were new focus trees and the like for China, Communist China, Manchukuo, and the 5 Chinese warlord states of Xinjiang, Xibei Sanma, Shaanxi, Yunnan, and the Guangxi clique. Also alongside those entirely new trees were additional alternative history paths for Japan and Germany. Upon release, the DLC was met with generally positive reviews from players. Many seemed excited with the DLC's expanded scope and the appearance of ambition created therewith, and it seemed to me that its price seemed more justified as a result. The German content was especially well received, and we'll get to that in due time. However, a major criticism of HOI4's DLCs took root from the bulk of the criticisms laid against this DLC in those early days. They seemed too buggy upon release, likely due to purported lack of playtesting. Some players felt that this DLC broke too many established and appreciated game mechanics upon release. However, the general consensus of the DLC, both then and now, has been that it's been one of the better ones that Paradox has put out. And now, before another review bombing campaign is undertaken against a free DLC, let's explore those show-snatching focus trees from, God, 7 years ago. Most of the nations given the spotlight by this DLC were nations involved in the Second Sino-Japanese War, which erupted with the Marco Polo Bridge incident of 1937. Germany stands as the weird outlier in this case, though they did have strong diplomatic relations with both China and Japan at different times before and during the aforementioned war. We have 6 unique focus trees to get through today, so let's not waste any more time and jump with 2 feet into... Because China is still embroiled in the first half of its civil war, and many remnants of the warlord era are still in action, this section will be pretty complicated. I've lopped all the factions and warlords into one fat section here, for oversimplicity's sake, if nothing else. Let's begin with the internationally legitimate government in 1936, Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists, based out of Nanking. China starts out with an infamously corrupt government, an army in shambles, and a bit of inflation to add injury to insult. This isn't exactly good optics for any nationalist strongman who wants to unify his country, so what can be done about it? The Chinese focus tree, in particular its political path, explores and works to implement the 3 principles of the people, Sun Yat-sen's ideological platform for the Kuomintang. The democracy branch works to weaken the corruption in the government, though it at no point gives the Chinese people a chance to vote in the elections. They have to wait till the 80s for that. The nationalism branch allows China to either enforce warlord loyalty and finally snuff out the communist holdouts, or put differences aside and simply ensure loyalty among Chinese leaders in the face of growing Japanese aggression. Once Japan attacks, course, there are a handful of focuses to go about staving off their advance. As for Communist China, your starting situation is arguably worse. The country, more a series of disorganized Red Army units, is stuck in the northern deserts, having just finished the Long March. The Long March saw the Red Army escape certain destruction in the south and trek across most of China, losing upwards of 90% of their ranks. Plus, the group's leader, Mao Zedong, only recently took charge, and his hold is far from stable. The Chinese Communist tree is split into two parts. The first concerns the internal political situation. You can decide whether to stick with Mao and create a distinct sect of Marxism, throw your lot in with the Soviet Union, or incorporate a social democratic aspect to your operations, all culminating in the proclamation of the now familiar People's Republic of China. The other part, the larger of the two, guides the communist interactions with Japan and the nationalists, rebuilding out the military and planning for how to best defeat Chiang Kai-shek when the two finally come to blows. This path also concerns the warlords around Communist China, in which you can enforce their submission against both Tokyo and Nanking. Speaking of the warlords, the strongman government is somehow more corrupt and disorganized than the nationalist government. 4 of the 5 warlords begin the game as non-aligned autocracies, while Xinjiang is actually Stalinist, as Chiang Kai was closer with Moscow than with Nanking. He would later fight with the nationalists and live out his retirement on Taiwan. These 5 warlords all receive the same focus tree, in which you can strengthen your leader's grip on their provincial holdings and get their factions and the military in order. However, at some point you must either throw your lot in with the nationalists or the communists, or form a separate and independent faction in the greater struggle. Siding with a belligerent in the ongoing civil war will pit you in a power struggle against the leader you're trying to side with. If you can secure the loyalty of the other warlords and win over the loyalist provinces, or the Soviets, you can assume full control over your faction of choice, basically becoming the China or Communist China. At this point, your focus tree switches over to the tree of whichever country you've just become, and, assuming you didn't ask Japan for help and fall in subjugation to them, taking the opposition path will buff you such that you stand a chance on your own, and the focus tree you receive depends on your ideological ratios. I will note, as well, that none of these 3 focus trees actually enable you to change your ideology. Sure, you can change your leader as the communists, but in the end, when the focus trees are completed, Communist China and Xinjiang stay communist, and China, Yunnan, the Guangxi clique, Shanxi, and Xibei Sanma stay non-aligned. Also, in a first for HOI4, major Chinese factions, so not the warlords, actually share about half their focus tree. This shared tree concerns your interactions with the world powers. You can appeal for international investment and military support in your fight against either the Japanese or the other Chinese governments. Actually, you can collaborate with the Japanese through this tree, though at the expense of your relations with the United States. One thing I will highlight are the foreign military leaders you can receive through these interactions. Germany's von Falkenhausen, Soviets Cherepanov, 3 fake French people, or one of 3 Americans, the historical Stilwell, the in the area MacArthur, or the totally out of left field Eisenhower. The bottom segment of the shared branch sees you negotiate away the past century's many unequal treaties, forcibly unite China, if you haven't already done so, and expand your frontiers to historically claimed or controlled territories, like Arunachal Pradesh, Korea, and Mongolia. However, in mentioning all this, I should note that there is one other country that has access to the shared focus tree. Manchukuo, officially the Empire of Great Manchuria, is technically another faction in the Great Chinese Power Struggle, though their existence is at the whims of the Japanese overlords. Ruled by the last emperor of China, the nation enjoys relative security from the chaos sweeping the rest of China, until, of course, Japan decides to get involved, instead settling vast amounts of poor Chinese farmers. However, the presence of the Japanese military in the country causes conflicts of interest between Puyi and the Japanese regime to which he must answer. Resistance to the government in Hissing King has materialized any gangs of bandits, wreaking havoc across the country. To deal with your country's woes, you must send in the army to subdue the bandits and follow Manchukuo's partially unique focus tree. Ultimately, the tree boils down to a major choice for the future of the country. Do you assert your sovereignty as the natural successor to the Qing Empire, or do you obey the Japanese and, in the words of ISP, break down and cry? Choosing the former will allow you to rise up in open rebellion against the Japanese. Should you succeed, you may then turn your attention towards China, reasserting Puyi's control and reclaiming the famous Mandate of Heaven. Staying obedient does give you a bit of leeway to assert yourself as Japan's sponsored government of China, but it largely focuses on building yourself up and allowing Japan to use you in the fight against Kai-shek and company. And while we're on the topic of your Japanese overlords, while Japan's focus tree was reworked for the Cornflakes patch, it received 2 alternative political paths for this DLC. All the way to the left of the tree, there is a path to shift your country all the way to the left. Swapping officers with Manchukuo, which I guess was just Japan's dumping ground for undesirable political adversaries, and warring against the Chrysanthemum throne in a civil war. After the war, while you restructure your national system around the ideologies of Marxism, you can make the age-old Stalin or self decision and claim the suddenly independent Manchukuo as Japanese territory outright. However, if you prefer prefer your socialism to be more democratic and Christian, believe it or not, then shift your focus to the other exclusive focus path. This path pits you against the current political establishment, in which the government is controlled by forceful figures and the disjointed military. After waging another civil war and losing control of Korea and your Chinese subjects, you can establish a much more restrictive constitutional monarchy, not too dissimilar from how Japan's monarchy operates today, with Hirohito still as the emperor and Tetsu Katayama as the prime minister. You then work to hold the Soviets and other communist forces at bay, while securing the complete liberation of your Pacific backyard from totalitarianism and colonialism alike. Speaking of totalitarianism, did you know that the term emerged during contemporary discussions about the regimes in the Soviet Union and... We finish our description of the DLC's contents by completely straying away from the Second Sino-Japanese War motif and discussing arguably one of the most famous DLC additions in all of HOI4, the original German alternate history path. This path sees Germany rise up against the Hitlerian regime, rallying elements of the military around the iconic Field Marshal August von Mackensen and expelling the Nazis from your lands. Then, you have to choose who shall lead the country into a future devoid of such a vile ideology. The first choice is to restore the Hohenzollern monarchy, whose househead is still alive and chopping wood in the Netherlands. So if you can force the Dutch throne to give in, you can restore Kaiser Wilhelm II to the throne, reassert your control over your former colonies and European reaches, and either stick it to the Allies as a whole or enact your revenge against the French directly. Another major antagonist established in this path is the Soviet Union, as the new German government pledges to defend the rest of Europe from its spread. And there's also a democratic path, but I've yet to meet a single person who actually gives a shit about it. Having exhaustively explored this expansion, let's step from the realm of objectivity into the ethereal, floaty world of subjectivity. In fewer words, what do I think about Waking the Tiger? This is the first DLC that, gun to my head, I'd put in the good category. It easily outranks Death or Dishonor and Together for Victory, though it definitely struggles to maintain its high marks and remain relevant when compared to more recent expansions. However, it definitely has a fuller sense to it, at least for me. It seemed like there was more to do in general thanks to this DLC, whereas Death or Dishonor's content was geo-locked to Central Europe. I'll also give a special nod to the DLC's soundtrack, which consists of nothing but bops, War of Resistance and Battle of Wuhan in particular. The formidable nations have become a staple of HOI4 and can create fun self-guided games. They also give a little bit of content to those minor nations with absolutely zero hopes of a focus tree. Traits for military commanders are also great features in the game, and I'm really glad to see these elements finally integrated into the vanilla game. Now everyone can form those classic formidable nations, while the Japanese AI goes communist for the 8th run in a row. With the basic stuff out of the way, it's time for me to complain and commend the DLC-specific country additions. The weakest focus tree in the DLC, without a shadow of a doubt, is the Warlord's focus tree. This tree is hilariously tiny, though I don't say that to knock against it. I expect a tree like that to be small if the intention is for the player to replace it with a larger one during their run. What warrants this tree at the bottom of the pile is its lack of content and national improvement. The tree only removes your debuffs and maybe sets you on a path to take over either of the two Chinas, or become another Japanese stooge. The focus tree provides no way to actually build yourself up or tip the scales. Come to think of it, it doesn't provide anything to make playing as nations with largely crappy starting situations really fun. It doesn't give you much of a fighting chance against Japan or nationalist China, and if you've ever tried to wrestle national leadership from nationalist China, then you know about how much of a political power sink it is. An image like this ought to be featured in a Cursed Images compilation, not the average nationalist-aligned warlord run. Next up is Japan. In recent times, Japan's garnered a reputation for having the weakest focus tree of the majors. It's probably why Paradox is almost certainly updating them next. Again, I must reiterate that the rankings for this video are based only on the content added by the DLC. Japan's ranking is based solely on its exclusive communist and democratic paths. But that doesn't change the fact that these paths suck. They're far too short for a country that as influential and integral to the game as Japan. They don't offer much in terms of objectives to fulfill, territory to chase after, or domestic and international politicking to partake in. And don't forget, both paths require you to start a crippling and often drawn-out civil war. But these paths, due to their inherent blandness, only serve to build you back up to the caliber you were capable of at the game's start. Ultimately, what I mean to say is that Japan's alternate history paths are boring, bland, and lack a sufficient payoff to warrant a civil war. Entering into the meh territory, we have the other focal point of the DLC, China. Your tree is a pretty healthy size, or at least it was. Perhaps I'm just another future dweller who complains too much, but I at least like to think I'm viewing these trees as one would view them in 2018. Anyways, China does have some potential to become a military and industrial powerhouse, capable of influencing international relations and the outcome of conflicts the world over. However, their focus tree doesn't do a good job at adequately providing you with the resources to reach that potential. To China's credit, the tree allows you to fix most of your political woes, and unifying China isn't too difficult, provided a major doesn't attack and screw everything up. I can't think of much else to say other than that the nationalist Chinese focus tree feels like a hollow shell. I'll again give it credit for at least masking its blandness in a convincing veneer of stuff to do. Can't say the same for Japan or the warlords. And let me preface this next ranking by saying it's the only time I'll rank Communist China ahead of not Communist China on a subjective basis. That being said, I think the Communist Chinese focus tree has more to offer. Firstly, it's bigger than nationalist China's, despite not having any kind of dedicated military or industrial branches. However, Communist China gets props for being the only focus tree for any of the Chinas that allows you to change your political situation. Though you're stuck with the communists, you can pretty easily swap leaders. Communist China also employs some more sneaky, and historically accurate, tactics to subvert the nationalists while they're fighting the Japanese, which, though is painfully expensive, can give you a substantial boost in your fight against the nationalists. There are also some focuses to hold off the Japanese, should you seize the driver's seat exceptionally early. In that sense, the tree covers all the bases. If only the damn Soviets let me join the Comintern. In second place is Manchukuo. Their tree, barring the shared branch, bears no resemblance to that of China, Communist China, or the warlords, which all have a degree of overlap, either in intention or actuality. Of course, I can't not mention the handicapped elephant in the room, so I'll just come out and state the obvious. The obedience path is stupid. I think it has potential to do something interesting, but it doesn't do much of anything other than what I described earlier. Though, then again, you do still get some special perks for staying obedient, like straight up annexing Manchukuo, Japan's other Japanese puppet. The assertiveness path is the run maker and breadwinner for the tree. It offers plenty of challenges to your run, from defeating the Japanese in your independence war, to taking on all of the other Chinese states, to perhaps having to butt heads with the West in order to fully unite China under the House of Icing Yodo. It may be difficult, particularly at first, but there's a considerable reward for a job well done. And, unsurprisingly, the best addition from Waking the Tiger, in terms of focus trees, is the German alternative history content. Yep, the one nation with very little connection to the Second Sino-Japanese War ends up beating them all. Good on ya, Paradox. Restoring the German monarchy is not only one of the most based alternative history paths in the game, but is also probably one of the most fun. The Civil War isn't a grueling bang your head against the wall type slog, but it isn't stupidly easy either. Its predictability was so appreciated by the community that, when Germany was reworked for the Goethe Dammerung DLC, they kept the basic nature of the German Civil War the same. It starts with a focus, divides the same states, and takes the same short amount of time to initiate. Allowing Germany to forcibly recreate Austria-Hungary is also a cool touch, in my opinion, and though its implementation was weird for a while, the idea of the Kaiser lobbying for greater monarchical powers in Italy is neat as well. What can I say? It's nice when the German AI brings back the Kaiser, and it's even nicer to do it yourself. As for the actual focal points of this DLC, as per usual, I have some suggestions for how to make the various Chinese states in Japan more enjoyable for future players. Now, obviously, Germany's already been reworked, so I won't make any suggestions for them. And, at the very least, Japan is guaranteed to rework very soon, so it's possible that these suggestions end up being realized. Speaking of Japan, they're up first, since they're basically the most underdeveloped major nation now. Firstly, it's ludicrous that a major nation only has 3 country leaders. The major with the next fewest leaders has over 3 times that many. I understand why they stuck with Hirohito to be the initial country leader, given the country had 15 separate prime ministers over the 12-year time period covered by the game. However, there could at least be an option for the player to install the more famous prime ministers, such as Fuminaro Konoe and Hideki Tojo, as country leaders, particularly if Japan is fascist. I mean, Tojo is in the game, but only as a generic portrait and political advisor for Japan. He doesn't even get a unique trait in that capacity. Also, besides all the paths having more unique choices and more stuff to do, I think it'd be neat if there was a way to forcibly unite China under Manchukuo, perhaps even restoring the Qing Empire under the careful management of the Japanese Empire. Think of it like how Germany can forcibly restore Austria-Hungary. Also, for a focus about recreating the Japanese shogunate, there's no shogun. In fact, there's hardly anything special with it. You'd think one of the more opportunistic officers, like Tojo, would declare themselves shogun and become the country leader, but as for right now, nope. And when I said Japan lacks stuff to do, I wasn't exaggerating much. The focus tree at present provides almost no ways to interact with Mongolia, Australia, or the British Raj. Also, do I even need to point out that there is no Pearl Harbor in a game about the Second World War? Bombing raids are even a game feature now, so there's no excuses anymore. As for Manchukuo, if they ever were to rework it, I'd like to see the obedience path be given away from Manchukuo to break free, perhaps on the condition that they may not leave the Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere. Or maybe they have to conquer a certain percentage of Chinese territory, at which point independence could be granted as a job well done. On that note, I'd also like to see the two emperors' focus actually change something. Italy and Ethiopia can form an empire that, at least in name, is equal parts Italian and Ethiopian. Even if a united Sino-Japanese empire is a stretch, proponents of joint focus trees have a freebie right here, between Japan and her subjects, or the co-prosperity sphere as a whole. Alternative fascist paths would be interesting as well. Manchuria is not just another region of China, after all. Manchuria only fully assimilated into China when it was settled en masse by the Han Chinese following the end of the Civil War. Perhaps they can make a path in which the Manchurian people rise up against Puyi and his Japanese overlords, decrying the House of Eisengyoro as traitors to the Manchurian people for selling out. This newly independent Manchuria could then throw her lot in with the Soviets or seek assistance for the West in fending off the Japanese and Chinese nationalists. Lastly, I like to see them do more with the White Russian exiles living in Manchukuo. This is another alternative fascist path waiting to happen, given the Russian Fascist Party based a lot of its operations in Manchukuo instead of Transamur. When they made a Finnish focus tree, I was pretty disappointed that you couldn't establish a White Russian exile hub from which to harass the Soviets. Think Taiwan and China today. And I mean, they have Grigory Semyonov as an advisor already. Why not let him repurpose this Japanese puppet state into a forward operating base for a white reclamation of Russia? And don't forget all the Russian territory across the Amur River that's claimed by some to be an extension of Manchuria. While I don't expect communist China to suddenly flip to an ideology, given the whole country is based around being, well, communist, I would like to see more ideological mobility for the warlords and nationalists. There shouldn't be any trouble in keeping a warlord in a leadership position, given they're all individual characters now who can be assigned 4 leader roles. If a civil war were to break out, you could simply force that character to stay with the old regime, and they'd stay the leader of the revolting ideology without fighting against themselves. Furthermore, some more unique paths could be explored for individual warlords. Apparently Yunnan and the Guangxi clique had more amicable opinions of the democratic process, and though their ideal candidate is dead, Japan had plans to install a puppet government in Xinjiang under a member of the Osmanoglu family, also known as the former rulers of the Ottoman Empire. But hey, the entire family was exiled from Turkey in 1924, so it wouldn't be too hard to find a willing ruler somewhere. In general, I like to see the warlords be able to take stands with radically different governments in the wider Chinese conflict, allowing outside nations like the Soviets or British to meddle in the region's affairs. And for nationalist China, why does Chiang Kai-shek have to be the end-all be-all? Why can't they strike a deal with the Japanese, offering mild concessions in return for peace and perhaps cooperation? Poland and Germany can do the same thing, after all. And why can't someone else take the reins of the Kuomintang? There is a not insignificant left-wing faction of the Kuomintang. Its spiritual successor still exists today as a minor democratic party under the thumb of the CCP. And people forget that Wang Jingwei and Wang Wenhao are currently country leaders, but there's no way in the focus tree for either of these two men to take a stab at unifying China. But
you have 23 hours before the piss droplets hit the fucking earth!
In conclusion, Waking the Tiger set a pretty solid bar for future HOI4 expansions, easily outranking its predecessors in my book. For 2018, it was pretty ambitious with its scope. Never before had they added 6 focus trees in one DLC, and they haven't surpassed this number since. However, it suffered the same aging issues as Death or Dishonor, falling by the public wayside as more expansive expansions rolled into view. In retrospect, the DLC has become a product of its time. You see, the DLC was coded and released for a much smaller and simpler version of the game, where the devs could generally get away with blander focus trees, and certain figures or happenings could be glossed over or ignored entirely. I realize that this video is, well, quite lengthy, so I guess I'll wrap up my thoughts here. Feel free to express your own thoughts on this DLC, or the new sprites, in the comments. While you're at it, I would greatly appreciate a thumbs up and a subscribe. And when you're through with all that, drink your water, and stop falling over.